I'm Sarah Oger. I'm the Executive Director of Humanities New York. Welcome to the first showcase of Public Humanities Fellows work. I'll explain a bit about the fellowship and about Humanities New York and how we came to do this project. Humanities New York is the statewide partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We have a statewide mandate and statewide board membership. That sounds louder, thank you. We were founded in 1975, first on the heels of the Great Society program that founded the National Endowment for the Humanities, and then a sort of a decentralized states movement to make sure that what the NEH did was available in every state, and that was sort of a Nixonian premise. So now there's a state humanities council in each state and territory. The work that we do is a bit diverse. We're the only state council that has a program quite like this one. So it's unique in that respect, and in some ways in the field of the public humanities as well. Before we started doing this program, I would have said that what we do is make grants and run direct programs, and this program is meant to latch into those activities and help our public humanities fellows realize what that work is at a minimum. Like, that's sort of what we have to train folks with, and then it becomes a learning continuum where we learn from the projects of the students. So we had not had for many years any formal relationship with universities. So part of the impetus for the program was to have that handshake with universities. What could we work on together that would enhance public humanities, make the idea of working in the public arena for and with people in places where they live and work something that universities had more than a glancing relationship with? And we thought that was a really big aspiration and very hard to come by until we started talking to some of our peers. And Eileen Galuli is here, and she's one of the directors that helped us cook up this program. Others included Tim Murray of Cornell University and a bit of a nudge from the Mellon Foundation initially, who the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation is now, we are very grateful, the funder of the program, and brought it to life. So in our initial conversations, we weren't really sure what that would look like with universities. What it turned out to be almost immediately was a plea for something for graduate students in the humanities. What could we do to build skills, diversify skills, and create awareness of a larger humanities field beyond even the academic sphere? So we felt we had that in hand and that we could help students through the looking glass a little bit. I have to thank our partner universities. We have 9 of them. We had originally had 7. We thank Acting Director Keith Wilson here at the Graduate Center at CUNY, in particular for hosting us and offering the Skylight Room, which is beautiful. And Kendra Sullivan, we've worked with for many years as well, for helping us host and plan. And as I mentioned, Eileen Galuli, as one of the founding directors of the program, is also the person who prodded us a lot to do this one showcase today. So thank you for the kernel of the idea and helping us pull it together. Eileen is the director of the Heyman Center for the Humanities at Columbia University. We are expecting on the road right now Vivian May, the director of the Humanities Center at Syracuse University. Kathleen Wilson couldn't attend. She's the director of the Humanities Center of SUNY Stony Brook. We thank the NYU Center for the Humanities, led by Gwyneth Mallon, for our sake, and Ami Bar-On at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Binghamton. David Castillo is our partner, the director at the Humanities Institute at the University of Buffalo, and we have a new director coming in at the A.D. White Society for the Humanities at Cornell University. I have some colleagues in the office. Adam Capitano here is our point person and liaison for this program, works with the fellows at all times and creates their curriculum. And Antonio Ponta-Nunez is here, development officer. And then later we'll be joined by Nicholas McDonald as well. He's on his way. And then I have at least one board member in attendance. Bob Vanny is a member of the board of directors. So I suppose as a matter of housekeeping, we will hang out a little bit after this and then go together to the, it's called the archive, for a beer or whatever they have there. and a chance to chat some more. So I've run around to a lot of the people to say, are you coming? And if you're not, I already bent your ear about something that we needed to talk about. Okay, so I thank you for attending, and we'll probably have a couple of other board members arrive that will hang out for meeting with you afterwards as well. So thank you all, and what I'll do is turn it over to our first speaker, Cara Schusterman. Each of the fellows, former fellows, will say what they're doing now and sort of self-introduce very briefly. And we do have I hope you picked up the little brochure that has everybody's accolades and affiliations and titles. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cara Shousterman, as you know, and I was part of the first Public Humanities cohort with Max, who's also on this stage, and that was in 2013 to 2014. And currently, I work at a place called Harmony Labs. I'm a program director, and my job at the Harmony Labs is actually kind of a direct result of this fellowship that we're talking about today, which led to another Public Humanities Fellowship, which is the Mellon ACLS Public Fellows Program. And so the Harmony Labs hosted me for that fellowship, and I kind of just stayed on. So anyways, we're going to go back in time a little bit and talk about this, the Public Humanities Fellowship that I did in 2013, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project that I was working on through them. So at the time when I was doing this fellowship, I was finishing up my PhD in linguistics from New York University, where I was studying two different dialects of English, and those were Puerto Rican English and African American English. And I was looking at contact between these two dialects, and specifically I was doing my fieldwork in Spanish Harlem here in New York City. So let me tell you a little bit about these dialects in case you've never heard these terms before. So African American English is a non-standard variety of English characteristically spoken by African Americans in the US. And when we say non-standard, we mean it doesn't have institutional support, at least not here in the US. And Puerto Rican English is a non-standard variety of English characteristically spoken by stateside native English speakers of Puerto Rican heritage. And these are really broad terms. So they encompass a really wide range of ways of speaking, from very formal to very casual. And there's actually a lot of overlap between these two varieties, often due to contact between people who are living in a lot of the same places, like Spanish Harlem. Now, something these dialects are not, contrary to what a lot of people think, they're not degraded forms of English. They're not slang. They're not English with a lot of mistakes. They're not illogical, and they're not spoken by all African Americans or all Puerto Ricans all of the time. There's a lot of variation there, and they're not the same all over the US. There's also a lot of regional variation. What they are actual linguistic systems that have set phonological, morphological, syntactic, semantic, and lexical patterns. And they have specific communicative practices associated with them, and they're rule governed. And I'm going to show you in a second what exactly that means. Now, of course, there are many people who believe that there is one correct way to speak English, and anything that deviates from that is lazy or unintelligent or incorrect or has no rules or no structure, and that's what we call standard language ideology. And it has very damaging, far-reaching consequences. It's linguistic prejudice, essentially. And so I'm going to give you a little illustration of why we think of this as an ideology rather than a fact. So let me show you a little example. And this kind of construction was something that I was commonly encountering among speakers from the community where I was doing my dissertation research. So African American English has this marker be, which can be used before a verb to say that something happens continuously or habitually. So in African American English, you can say, Tonya be riding her bike. And that would be roughly equivalent to saying in standard English, Tonya rides her bike regularly. So if you wanted to turn that statement into a question, like Tonya rides her bike regularly, doesn't she? The question is, would you know how to? So these are some choices I have. think about it for a second, pick one in your head. Is there anyone who guessed B? All right, let me see. Anyone? Hands? Okay, a couple people. So if you guessed B, you probably have had some kind of extensive contact with speakers of this dialect, or maybe Southern vernacular English, some kind of white Southern vernacular English, which can tend to have some of the same constructions. If you didn't know the answer, African American English is probably not a variety you grew up speaking, so naturally you don't really know the rules. So imagine you had to answer questions all the time in a language variety that you didn't grow up speaking at home. It seems like it would be a pretty frustrating experience, and for millions of young people in the US, it is a really frustrating experience. Because African American English is not recognized as a legitimate dialect of English in the US school system, many of its younger speakers have trouble learning to read and write, and they're put in all kinds of remedial education programs. But mostly due to dialectal differences and not any cognitive issues. So getting back to what I was doing, I was a volunteer tutor at an after-school program for my dissertation research, and I was encountering a lot of these issues with reading and writing that could be traced to dialectal differences. So that's when I started to think about how could I bring ideas from linguistics to help the kids that I was tutoring. And I decided to propose this program for this Public Humanities Fellowship where I would do this kind of work. And I was especially interested in doing it at the after-school program because it seemed like the right kind of environment. It didn't have as much kind of bureaucracy, red tape, that sort of thing. So that brings me to my Public Humanities project. And the year that I was doing this fellowship, we were kind of allowed to think of it more as a planning grant. I'm not sure if that's still the case. But it was really a time to think about things, get the right training, think through what some of the problems might be that would arise. And so that encompassed a lot of my activities at the time. So basically the project that I was working on was designing a program for New York City school children who were in grades 3 to 6, who would be exposed to information about English language variation. It would help if I could speak English, through discussion and activities. And so there were really 4 components for this program. So the first one was to talk about dialect variation and just kind of have people talk about their own observations about how people speak and use that discussion as a point of entry for explaining some different dialects in the US and key features that differentiate them, and just to kind of foster that respect of language diversity. And then the second unit was really to draw this distinction between home language, and school language. So start to think about what some of those differences might be in how one might speak in those 2 different domains. And then really introduce this concept of school English as this standardized form of English that you just kind of may have to learn for specifically using at school or work later in life. And so even if it's not something you grew up speaking, that means you may need to actually explicitly learn it for this environment. And then the third unit, more on school English, is just that once that concept has been introduced, we can explore more in depth how one language or dialect gets to become the standard. And it usually has nothing to do with anything inherently about the language itself. It usually has to do more with the people who are in power in a given country. And then we can talk about how some features, even though they may be stigmatized, are actually not bad English, but are part of the grammar. And then finally, I was proposing a final unit on code switching, which would be talking about the ability to switch between different dialects in speaking and writing when the need arises, and just kind of highlighting how we all have multiple ways of speaking in our own linguistic repertoires. And so this is stuff that linguists have been working on for a while and haven't really had that much success bringing into the classroom. So my idea, like I said, was really to have this happen in the after-school environment where it's kind of a safe environment, and would have been maybe a better place for that. So the goals of the project were really to empower students through knowledge of dialect differences, instill a sense of linguistic pride, and teach strategies for increasing communicative effectiveness in academic situations. Yeah, I think one of the most critical interventions really happens when we're able to compare and contrast dialects and teach kids rules in a dialect, even if it's not the way they're used to speaking at home. So as far as where I'm at now, I'm currently not a practicing linguist, although I still keep in touch with the linguistics community. So I haven't had a chance yet to complete this project, but it's stayed with me for sure after all these years, and I'm hoping at some point to be able to do something with it. But nevertheless, I'm proud to be part of the first cohort of Public Humanities Fellows, and it was really helpful for me to get the knowledge and the training and the support that came with proposing this kind of project. And everything we learned, grant writing, securing funding, facilitating community conversations, building community partnerships, writing for public audiences, speaking for public audiences, these are things that have been invaluable for me in my own trajectory. And I was really fortunate to be brought into this incredible network of humanities scholars, many people who I recognize in the audience right now, and I'm happy that I get to keep engaging with them throughout my career. So I think it's really put me on a track to keep building up my professional experience to the point where I think it's getting to a point where it's possible for me to have an even bigger impact now than maybe I could have at that time. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francisco Delgado. I was a Public Humanities Fellow just last year. I am currently a full-time lecturer at the University of New Haven, so still plugging away at that academic dream, I guess. Right? I'd like to first thank you all for being here today. It's great to see a few familiar faces. I'd like to thank Adam and Sarah for organizing this event. And also, just finally, before I get into my presentation for today, I just want to take a moment of silence to observe the Lenape people whose indigenous lands we're now standing on. All right, so as I said before, I was a Public Humanities Fellow just last year while I was finishing up my dissertation on dystopia and race, which I was arguing are inherently linked. Seems obvious now, but when I came up with the idea 3 years ago, I was like the only one saying it, actually. Yeah. So how I came to this project through my dissertation was one of the ways that dystopia, I argue, is perpetuated is by controlling the means of knowledge, of expression, of communication. So when you think of all the endangered languages of the indigenous people of the United States, what could be more dystopic than that, right? All right, so my project gave me the opportunity to work with a community that is underrepresented in higher education, specifically the Onondaga, or Seneca people of upstate New York, upstate Western New York to be more specific. And I got to work with them on an idea that at the time was both novel and necessary, and I'll explain that qualifier at the time in a little bit. My idea was a website that teaches conversational words and phrases of the Onondaga Goweno, literally meaning language of the people of the Great Hills, or the Seneca language. I selected the digital medium specifically because I wanted to create something for Seneca people that lived off the reservation and were thus unable to take advantage of the face-to-face language classes that were being offered there. In addition, for those individuals that did live on the reservation but who could not fit the language classes into their schedule, I hope to create a digital platform that presented the language in an accurate and understandable fashion that made individual study a bit less arduous. So I'd like to begin by explaining my motivations for proposing this project. Although the information varies depending on the source, the number of fluent speakers of the Onondaga Goweno is estimated to be as low as 40 persons, and that number is coming from a teacher at the Allegheny Reservation, and only as high as 100. So the highest estimate is barely, 3 digits. In other words, I knew that my traditional language was increasingly endangered, and I saw the Humanities New York Public Humanities Fellowship as my opportunity to address the issue in some way that, I felt I could. I am Onondaga on my mother's side. Our reservation is in Tonawanda, Western New York again, which is not to say that we grew up on the reservation or that we grew up speaking the language, because we did neither of those things. So my work on this project also considerably increased my own grasp of the language, which prior to this was limited to, a couple greetings at most. To help address the language's endangered status, I reached out to teachers and activists of the Onondaga Goweno, and I'll just name a few of them now, such as Samantha Jacobs, who writes and edits the Seneca Language newsletter, Jimmy Crane, who works for the language program on the Allegheny Reservation, and Damian Webb, who heads the language program at Tonawanda. And I reached out to them not only for feedback on my translation work, but also to help me determine, what groups of vocabulary or what types of vocabulary were most important to learn. What, for instance, are the first lessons that they cover in their own curricula? This collaborative approach was one that was stressed to us in the Humanities New York workshops, especially that first one that we attended in August. And it is a tactic that I think helped me in my efforts to forge a working relationship with members of a community that, is, generally speaking, distrustful of people that are coming from outside of that community, up to and including, maybe especially including, people from academia. So with the rest of my time here today, I would just like to show the website itself, the product of this project. And I think I'll be able to, good. All right, so you'll see here up top how I decided ultimately to organize the vocabulary that I feature here. So hello, goodbye, getting around town, asking questions, people, family, kinship, clans, and more. What's more? Foods, weather, seasons, image library for further learning, and a blog, which is like the latest addition to the website. And I'm hoping we can at least get to a handful of these in my time up here today. But first, this is the homepage. This is what visitors see when they come looking for, some Onondaga Goweno in their, day-to-day lives. So first, I begin by greeting everybody. Welcome, everyone. I say to you all, Nyawe Skeno, pronounced Nyawe Skeno, which translates literally to, I'm thankful you are well, and it's a common greeting in Seneca. From there, I, detail the mission of the website, which I stated for you all here today. And give a little bit of history. I didn't want to inundate visitors with too much history. I did take into consideration that this is an online platform, and as such, I tried to really emphasize readability. I wanted to give as much of the relevant information as I could, but I also understood that it was impossible to give it all. There are whole books about it, All right, so, and then at the bottom is my acknowledgement of Humanities New York, and also my contact information should anyone have any questions or corrections. And then a pronunciation guide at the bottom. This was included at the suggestion of the language teachers at the Seneca reservations. It is something that I have here on the home page, but I want to perhaps include on every other page as well, just so visitors don't have to, click back and forth. So that's probably my next project. It's certainly easy enough to do. It wouldn't take too much time. All right, we'll click on hello, goodbye now. So starting the conversation, in this section, we cover words and phrases designed to start a conversation, keep a conversation going, and ways to say goodbye. I figured this was the most logical starting point as, in order to say anything, you first have to get that conversation going. So Nyawe Skeno again, meaning hello. Right below that, you have Sadogweta, how are you doing? And then a few responses to that. And as I do throughout the website, I put in bold any, proverbial cheats that I was able to tease out in my study of the language. So here I note that the DE prefix negates the sentiment being expressed. So if someone asks you, Sadogweta, you could say, Gadogweta, meaning I am well, or if you add that DE prefix, De Gadogweta, it becomes I am not well. And as I said, I did that just because I know that studying a language on your own can be very arduous, and I know that studying a language like this that has no, its relationship to English is tenuous at best, right? There's not a lot of overlap. Could be incredibly difficult. So I was trying to just keep that in mind when I decided what to bold, if you will. The next section is getting around town. This just covers various places within the community that you might need to ask directions for. So school, library, grocery store, bookstore, being hopeful that there are bookstores somewhere. There aren't too many in Queens where I live, but I'm hopeful that they're somewhere. They have to be, right? And then at the bottom here are just some historical locations that are very significant to Seneca history. And that includes the modern day reservation. So Cattaraugus, Allegheny, and Tonawanda are both represented up there, as well as Oil Springs and Buffalo. The word for Allegheny meaning Ohio. So are there any Ohioans in the house? Yeah, Ohio is a Seneca word. Just, my Ohioan friends always, they got a kick out of that. And Canandaigua being my hometown, so I just felt like including it just because. Tecanodaigua, so very similar, you'll see. All right, we'll skip over to people, family. This was included at the strong suggestion of the language teachers that I was corresponding with. They stressed that the most important thing you can express is your relationship to one another, how you relate to each of the people that you know in your lives. So at the start here are just some general words, how to refer to people from each of the individual reservations, and then I get into family, perhaps the most important group of vocabulary that is taught. So that includes the word family, Gawajia, or my family, Kwajia. And then I go grandmother, mother, so on and so forth. I begin with the women because Seneca culture is matrilineal, which means that your lineage is traced through your mother's side, through the women. And I wanted to, in some ways, reflect that with my organization of the website. Linked closely to family, next up is kinship clans. So each clan has a clan mother that looks out for their collective good, including making sure, Skype. Okay. Including making sure that the chief meets the clan member's needs. The clan mother position is passed on hereditarily, and clans are represented by animals and are divided by land, water, and air. So I'm going to try to do this without, okay, good, no Skype this time. So here are all the clans and how to say I'm from here, she's from here, or he's of that clan. Another note, largely all she statements begin with go and all he statements begin with ho, but as is the case with most rules of language, there are, of course, exceptions. So I start with that exception, turtle, right out of the gate. You'll notice that to say she's of the turtle clan and he's of the turtle clan, they have yen and han as their prefixes. But then everything after that is ho and go, right? So I'm of the wolf clan, so I would say Agatayoni, I'm of the wolf clan, Otayoni, meaning wolf. And just to, I guess we'll go down to the image library. This is where I wanted to give a visual representation of some of the select vocabulary that I feature here. It is a work in progress. The whole website's, I don't think any effective website is a static thing. All of them are works in progress. I want to add to this as soon as possible once I can arrange a meeting with my artist who is my sister. So presumably our paths will cross, right? And then for further learning. So, all right. I said before my idea was unique and novel at the time. What I meant by that was when I proposed this project, it was unique. There was no resource online for this type of thing. But since then, after my project was accepted, I think later that year in the fall, the Allegheny Language Department put up their own website, covering the exact same things that I laid out in my own proposal. So that became a huge thing for me, like, all right, what do I do now? And I have to give a lot of credit to the Humanities New York office for giving us some workshops on how we can navigate that event when, there is a similar project out there already that could perhaps predate yours in some way. So I spoke to the creators of this website. I was already conversing with them and corresponding with them. And just, what I wanted to do, and this is what you have up here, is I wanted to link to their website. That is quite literally the least I could do. Just to kind of forge this pathway of study, right? So my emphasis is on conversational Gueno, like what people would need on a day-to-day basis. But should you wish to pursue your studies further, you could click on this link here and be taken to the Allegheny Language Department website, which includes, video files, audio files, an extensive dictionary, things that I, do not provide here. So my emphasis on conversational Aonondawaga Gueno was one way I kind of differentiate my project from theirs. And the other thing I did, and this is just a very recent occurrence, to differentiate my work from theirs is I started a blog, if it shows up and not Skype. Okay, good. There it is. And what I'm hoping to accomplish, that's my grandmother from 1948. What I'm hoping to accomplish with the blog is to track my own journey studying the language, right? So languages are elastic, evolving things. The study of language, by extension, is an elastic, evolving thing. So I'm hoping to use the blog to chart my journey with the language as I make my way through a grammar book. I'm not a linguist, so I need all the help I can get. And I'm also, I've started to conference call into some of those face-to-face classes on the reservation as well. So as I learn more, I hope to update this blog, and that will be yet another thing that kind of differentiates my work from the Allegheny Language Department's work, in that, it's about, learning Seneca for me as well, right? So, yeah, that's all I have for today. I'm looking forward to your questions during the Q&A. Thank you all. Yahweh.
Hi, thanks for having me today. This is a lot of fun to see what other people are up to. I think this is the first time since my fellowship year where I've had conversations with people about what ever became of that project, so this is great. My name is Tom Guiler, and I was a Public Humanities Fellow in 2014-2015 when I was a PhD candidate in history at Syracuse University. Since then, I'm now manager and instructor of academic programs at the Winter Museum, Garden, and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm sort of a jack of all trades, so if you want to ask me about what I do, it takes a good 20 minutes to lay out, but I'm more than happy to answer that question. I can say with certainty that the best, most rewarding, and frankly eye-opening part of my graduate career was being involved with Humanities New York, as a Public Humanities Fellow, as well as other opportunities as well. So I'm here today, though, to talk a little bit more specifically about my experience as a fellow, my project, and the immense impact of this program on me personally and our communities more generally. As a historian of upstate New York, my vision during the fellowship year was always to have a GPS-based digital history project that could pin key historic sites in upstate New York in order to bring the rich, fun, and deep history of this region to life for all audiences, from children to seniors. And I think, like Francisco, this kind of comes from a deeply personal place because I just love upstate New York. I grew up there. I remember going to Genesee Country Museum and just being blown away by history. So I wanted it to be something that reflected that. I wanted it to be accessible on the go, include pictures, and be interactive and educational without being pedantic. I also knew that I needed to do this in a way that would not take me miles away from my dissertation, as that was always the goal, was to finish. So I decided to start with a small digital tour of one of the subjects of my dissertation, which was on intentional communities in the arts and crafts movement, Birdcliff, which is in upstate New York. Which was a utopian community that formed according to the ideology of the arts and crafts movement, and that was the project that ended up becoming Upstate Historical. But I knew little to nothing about DH. I knew what I wanted it to look like, but I had no idea how to make it look like that. I didn't have much to know about funding or sponsors or stakeholders or anything like that. But Humanities New York gave me the skills to do all of this, and I could not be more thankful for that. I was trained in the possibilities of DH, as the council introduced me to leaders in the field that helped me go to that camps and the Digital Humanities Summer Institute in Victoria, British Columbia. They even connected me to the great folks at the Cleveland State University who trained me in the software that powers Upstate Historical. I was taught how to present yourself to public partners, in my case, the Woodstock Birdcliff Guild and the Winter Library. See how I got my foot in the door there? I partnered with them. To obtain permissions for this site content, and how to come up with a plan to identify stakeholders, pitch my idea to funders, which in this case I just called Adam, to supply me with funding to take a workshop at Cleveland State, and finally to hone my public writing skills so I could craft the entries in a way that would be suitable for my intended audience. This all turned into a realized project. Today, Upstate Historical is an interactive website, and eventually, when I get the money, it will be an app that brings the history of upstate New York to life for tourists, residents, and anyone interested in learning more about this important region. It's powered on Curatescape, which is based on Mecca. It's a web-based platform that uses GPS to allow contributors to key historical locations and upload story-based text, photographs, audio, and video content to tell the story of a particular place, the people that live there, and the events at that location. Once the site is accessed, users can click on a pin to find a brief story of the site's history, spoken primary source audio, video tours of the site, expert and local commentary, as well as period photographs and other primary documentation. Upstate Historical also has a tours link, where users can pick a theme, such as the Civil War, transportation, art, a region, such as the Catskills or the Finger Lakes, or even cities such as Albany or Rochester, to facilitate a tour of a specific dimension of upstate history. Upstate Historical allows people to explore the history of New York State, whether they're visiting a particular location on the ground or wish to learn from their homes. The goal of this project was always a community-based one, where that can and should rely on local people to tell their stories and join the team. To this end, this project is inspiring others to submit their own stories, photos, and documentation for new content all over upstate New York. Indeed, this is truly a public project and one that can make use of the diverse voices of all New Yorkers. So I started with Woodstock, New York, and I'm still working on a tour of the Birdcliff Arts and Crafts Colony, which was formed in 1903 by Ralph and Jane Whitehead. It was a leading art colony that attracted prominent artists to produce beautiful artwork in an idyllic setting. More importantly for this project, Birdcliff remains one of the most treasured sites of arts and crafts architecture, and it's a total sensory artifact of the movement. However, it wasn't very well interpreted. There was a mere brochure on it. So I wanted to bring this out into the open a little bit more, because it really is very well preserved period architecture. And I wanted to promote it and interpret it for a much wider audience. So what I did, I'll run you through a couple sites and how I did it. I think it's here. Yeah, cool. Oops. Oh, I click it harder. So this is Upstate Historical. This is what it looks like when you you land at the homepage. As you can see, the program worked a little too well because I haven't had a lot of time to add to it, but we have about half a dozen sites up right now. So one of them I will point out is, I will start with probably the most famous building at Birdcliff, which is White Pines. And White Pines was the manor house and the home of the Whiteheads. And what I wanted to do here was highlight arts and crafts architecture, linking it to that site, but more importantly, I wanted to tell the story of Ralph Whitehead through this building, and show how people could see him, as you can see here. The lead there is Ralph Radcliffe Whitehead, right? Benevolent monarch or overbearing despot, right? And it's how these people could see him differently. He comes from a very aristocratic English family and thinks he's doing all these really nice things for these artists by providing them space, but the artists think he's just overbearing. So I kind of wanted to get at that in kind of a interesting, fun way through the space. And I also did that because what's important about Upstate Historical is that it tells stories through text as well as pictures. So you can see this is a photo of White Pines from what's known as the Far Garden, and you can see it's up on this bluff, right? So I'm trying to tell a story of articulation of power and how Whitehead rules this community as what many observers called a feudal lord, which definitely comes out in the architecture. The other thing I wanted to do with this site was talk about arts and crafts architecture. So here's some really great interior shots of the interior White Pines. The fireplace tiles are actually from the Moravian Tile Works in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which was a leading arts and crafts ceramic hub just north of Philadelphia. The other thing, and this is important for the next site I'll show you, is this is Whitehead's grave marker in the Artist Cemetery in Woodstock. This will compare very interestingly to his co-founder, but obviously you can tell what he thought of himself with this Della Robbia-esque grave marker. The other site that I will show you today is of a co-founder, Bolton Brown. Bolton Brown was an artist from the Syracuse area who co-founded Birdcliff with Whitehead. So I wanted to tell a story of this place, of Brown using his home, what he known as Casa Carniola. I wanted to talk about his personality as well as his feuds with Whitehead, because he was one of the artists that didn't like being treated as a subject, a peasant, like Whitehead wanted him to, or wanted to see. So I used text here, but I also, this site doesn't exist anymore. It burned down in the 20s. So I wanted to show what this would be like. So if you were on the ground at Birdcliff, you could see what this place used to look like. So I've used these photos here. And also to really contrast him more with Whitehead, this is his grave marker. It's a rock that just says Bolton Brown on it. So I wanted to kind of tell the story of the power dynamics and the social life at Birdcliff. But I also decided to go kind of channel my inner Ken Burns and do some audio, right? So I wanted to play around with this. And I found one of my professors at Syracuse who I could listen to read the dictionary, read a couple primary sources for me. So I'll play one of these for you now, just to get a sense of what it's like.
Cal Short's barns up at Rock City, boxed off a section, put in a window, a stovepipe hold, and a stove, and there we had the first studio in Woodstock. Installed at a draftsman's table, I, jack of all trades, was transformed from a go-getter to an architect. I planned Whitehead a house and one for me. When built, he called his White Pines, and mine is now Carniola. We decided other building sites, that of the library and dance hall, the eating house, a studio or two, a barn, and so on, and vaguely the layout of roads to serve them. Whitehead put more money in the Kingston Hank to my credit and disappeared into California for the winter. I got out and hired every able-bodied man I could see. One gang with teams and lumber wagons, I sent out over the fields to gather up stones and haul them to where the pick and shovel men were sinking cellars and foundation trenches. Others ran pipes from springs up on the mountainside and ditches 3 feet deep, sometimes through solid rock. A box-like shelter for the timekeeper was the first new building. A cold rain threatened and the men were for knocking off. My nimble riding pony carried me swiftly to Ed Harder's store, and before the rain had time to get it going, I was distributing to my workers free oilcloth suits. Winter was coming. I could not afford to lose an hour. Bolton Brown.
So I got a little creative there when I went to Victoria and put the hammers in the background. I just couldn't resist. So, and then finally, I'll show this last part. So if it ever does become an app, you can put it on your iWatch, your smartwatch, and if you walk by Carniola, this factoid will show up that Bolton Brown was a hiker and he has a mountain named after him in the Sierra Nevadas. So your watch will buzz and tell you something interesting. So coming soon. But I can say overall with relative certainty that my experience as a public humanities fellow was absolutely indispensable when I entered the job market and landed my current job at Winterthur. The Public Humanities Fellows Initiative was honestly life-changing for me. I went from a graduate student with dreams of the tenure track to realizing that the skills I was being trained in, both in graduate school as well as humanities in New York, could translate to a wider view of a fulfilling career. I realized that my calling was bigger, and that a fulfilling career did not mean just writing books and articles, but bringing that knowledge to the public, not only through reading and discussion groups, digital projects, and exhibits and public engagement, but also as well in addition to the written word. It was through this program that I could say I found my vocation. I believe this work today is more important than ever. It is through the humanities that change in this country can come. It is the critical thinking, public interaction, and honest engagement with what it means to be human that will preserve and shape this country for many years to come. The humanities are the first line of defense against bigotry, hate, and closed-mindedness. And this is why I do what I do, and why I'm proud to be a humanities scholar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And wow, I'm so excited to learn more about Winterthur. I have another museum project to share with you. Although, while Elise is getting this up, my background's a little bit different in that I came from the museum world into graduate school. And since I've been here at the CUNY Grad Center, which welcome, by the way, I've been trying to find ways of bridging my experiences in the museum world and the work that I'm doing in the history program here and the ideas that I've learned to the ideas that I'm learning. So this is something I've been doing throughout my time here, and the Public Humanities Fellowship was so helpful in really helping me bring this to the next level, giving me the space to not have to do other work in order to do a new kind of project that is continuing on today. So I was a fellow with Francisco just last year, And at just about the same time as the fellowship began, I got a phone call from my former boss at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum saying that, had I ever been to Kingston, New York? And I was like, no. So different than your experience, I am not from upstate New York. Has anyone here been to Kingston, New York? A couple people, oh great. So those of you who have been to Kingston, New York, have any of you been to the Rondout neighborhood of Kingston, New York? Aha. So interesting. So one of the things that I've learned early on is many people who go to Kingston, New York go to learn about the Dutch heritage of the uptown area in Kingston, New York. But where I was brought and where I've come to love already in Kingston, New York is the Rondout or the downtown neighborhood. So for me, as somebody who had come out of the Lower East Side Tenement Museum and has been teaching immigration history, studying immigrant communities, the opportunity to learn about a non-New York City scale story of immigrants in Kingston, New York, who lived in this downtown neighborhood was a really exciting opportunity. And the Rear Center for Immigrant Culture and History is the brainchild of Jeff Miller, who's here in the audience. And he founded it in 2004, in part because of this building, which is in the Rondout neighborhood. This is number 99 to number 101 Broadway in Kingston, New York. And it was built in 1877 by an Irish immigrant named Clunan who had a sarsaparilla bottling factory. It was right on the corner of Spring Street and Broadway. There used to be a spring running down Spring Street, and so they started out bottling water. But the name of the Rear Center comes from the longest tenants of this building and owners of this building, who were the Rear family. Frank Rear was a Jewish immigrant from Krakow who came first to New York City, we think, but went to Rondout, went to Kingston, New York, and opened a bakery and moved his family inside of this building in 1907. So from 1907 until 2004, the Rear family lived and worked in this site. So nearly 100-year history of the Rears here. And part of what gave Jeff the idea to try to do something with this and why this site is special is because the day when they closed the bakery, they didn't really change much. So one day, Hyman Rear, who was the youngest baker in the family, just in the 1980s said, "We're closed," and locked the door and retired upstairs to the apartments. And you can see when he died in 2004, many of his belongings remained. You can see there the hats, the Stetson hat boxes, and his coats in the picture on the right. The picture on the left shows that there were actually 2 apartments. If you look back, you can see the top floor was always rented out. The second floor was where the Rear family lived, and the first floor was where they had this retail shop and bakery. So what Jeff and the team of volunteers from the Jewish Federation of Ulster County have been doing for the last 13 years is amazing work in stabilizing this building. So you can see here in 2009, they did a storefront restoration project. In 2014, a building stabilization project. And those are just words, but I mean, if you looked at the pictures of what this place looked like before, you wouldn't believe the amount of progress they've done in getting the building ready. But ready for what, right? That was the question that sort of Jeff brought in a man named Ward Mintz, who some of you may know, who's been a longtime museum professional, who then reached out to Annie, my former boss, who reached out to me. And the idea was we need museum interpretation people now, right? We've got the bones of it. But how do we go from a site that's got cool old stuff to a place that's a site-specific museum that will make meaning for people today? Right? Talk about a public humanities project. And so how lucky was I to get to apply the time that I had last year to thinking through with Jeff and the other folks on the committee to figure out what do we do? What are the first steps? Because that's a big project. But what are the first steps in interpreting this space? And so I drafted a proposal during the year last year, and many of the workshops were very helpful in doing that, especially one that was about budgeting and thinking through how do you do that. But what I wanted to do was investigate and protect the existing artifacts in the building and conduct archival research. collect stories from those who remembered the space, since Hyman Rear only died in 2004, so there were still folks alive who did, and then begin to practice telling our story. And if we couldn't tell it in the space ourselves, which we had hoped to, then find other ways of telling it as well. I knew that I couldn't do this alone or even with the resources of the committee. I needed someone who had expertise in objects and collections management. And so what you see here is our exhausted faces of me and Samantha Gomez on our very first day at July 1st. We had been putting together our office with Jeff all day. It was like 100 degrees. But she has a PhD in anthropology, and we've been so lucky to get to work together on doing the archival side here. So just to give you a sense of what we've been doing, because that was really the fellowship year. It ended in June, and here July 1st was our first day. Samantha especially got to work investigating piles and piles full of photographs, all different kinds of things. You can see the day her archival equipment arrived. You can see her boxes there. She's so excited. And meanwhile, I was doing online research using Ancestry.com, trying to pull together some of the stories of families like the Clunans and some of the amazing research that Jeff had already done, trying to sort of pick his brain and his server apart, trying to pull these things into something that I could move forward. Here are some of the things that we found. I'm so honored that the front of your program has this artifact on the left. This wasn't actually something that we found this summer. It was something Jeff had already found in the bakery itself. It says Sunday List. I don't know if you can see what's on your program, but it's a brown paper bag with handwritten penciled names and weird markings. And one of the first questions that I asked when I visited there last September was, who are these people? What Sunday List for what? I mean, I know it was a bakery, but who are they? And so even last spring, during the fellowship year, I was already starting to interview some of these people, put calls out, who are you? You know, if you recognize your name, tell me. And what we came to learn, I'll share in a couple of minutes. The picture in the middle is Sadie. This was like our Rosetta Stone. There are very few photographs of the interior of the building. And so this was one of the 6 siblings, the children of Frank Rear, who ran the bakery together. So it's kind of interesting. You can see in the background there that they not only had the bakery side of the business, they had retail grocery too. So those are boxes of river rice and lentils. It looks like Domino sugar. And we got, thanks to Samantha, super high-res scans so we can zoom in and really see what these things are. Then there had been an archaeological dig that had been funded as a part of the building stabilization project, and that image up on the corner top, the kind of creepy doll's head, was one of the things that was excavated from there. But for me, you know, I understand it's important archaeologically to see what's there, but it's like, oh my gosh, there were families who lived in this building, right, in the 19th century, and there were kids, and I can look at the census and say, maybe this belonged to this, you know, girl, and start to think about how to bring the space alive. The thing on the bottom, just beneath that in pink, was like the oh my God discovery of the summer, because many, many folks who I've interviewed and everybody in the committee, anybody who ever had known the Rears, said they refused to tell their recipe. There is no recipe. Well, it's not a full recipe, but one of the specialty products of the Rear family was rye bread. And so we have this sort of cryptic half recipe that includes things like a shovel full of flour or put it close to 2 inches from where Elsie did that. And you're like, I don't. But it's a start in any case. So it was very exciting. The other part on a lot of the work I've been doing is collecting stories from those who remember. So the image on the left is probably the most exciting thing, second only to the rye bread, when Buddy Cohen, who is a nephew of the Rears, drove up from Florida. He's 90, and he had visited, he'd spent summers at the Rear bakery visiting his aunts and uncles in the 1930s. And he is, you can see him pointing with his cane. He's describing exactly where the things had been in the oven room. Now, part of what's kind of amazing about this space is that it includes artifacts that we've started to be able to date from the 1890s, from the 1940s, from everywhere in the middle. So they never really updated anything. They just kind of kept adding to it. So it was amazing when he was recognizing, oh yeah, those are those troughs that I used to help punch dough on when I was a kid. The picture on the right is a longtime Kingstonian named Lou Kirshner, who's on our advisory committee, and we had blown up this Sunday list. Jeff did actually, blew up to make a poster of the Sunday list, and I keep touting it around to people saying, do you know who this might be? Do you know any of these people? And so that's he and his wife and his grandson. His grandson was hilarious. He was like, oh, is that the Secretos? No, that's a different Secreto. So. The idea, because we can't get into the bakery, it's not yet ready to have people in tours of the bakery, was to do it first online and to tell our story digitally. So I'm going to share with you one little clip, but before I do, this is kind of a prototype of what we're working on. I don't know if you can really see it, but there's going to be a page on our website that's the Sunday List project that includes the Sunday List, and next to the names of the folks who I've been able to interview, little flags or movie icons that will open up these films. So we've got the prototype, but I'm going to just show you a video not from the partially completed website.
My name's Kathleen Bikert, and I was born and raised in Kingston, and I'm very familiar with this building as a little girl. We came down here every Sunday and other days and purchased our rolls, which were absolutely delicious.
And my name is Dan Reinhardt. Kathleen is my cousin. My mother was a Melnick. Her father was a Melnick. I'm sure Willie Rear didn't really need this list. The type of businessman that he was, and that list to him, he probably checked, but in his mind he knew who was going to show up because it was the same faces all the time. And there was a lot of faces. And you would see different faces come in because people would say, you got to stop by Rear's Bakery on a Sunday morning. They've got the best rolls and bread in town. Sunday morning would be getting up early and getting the family together. And as I mentioned, we would be at the Immaculate Conception Church at 8 a.m. every Sunday morning. And it was my mom and dad and my sister and I. And I always remember wanting church to get over with so we could go out to visit Mr. Rear, and Willie would be on the corner, and the smell coming out of the, I think it was a Pontiac station wagon, it was blue. I remember the fins coming off the back fenders. But it was just a time where you would run up there, and it was like a little bit of race because everybody would want to be the first ones to get in line. And we would get either 8 or a dozen rolls, and we would bring them home. And on Sunday morning, my dad would make the breakfast. Mom cooked most of the other days, but Dad would make the breakfast. And I can remember it was either sausage or bacon or eggs. And the special treat for the breakfast was the egg or the bacon and the sausage going on the Rear's rolls.
Because we went right up the street to St. Mary's Church, and we would come down, and I mean, I don't believe that he was out in his car out here. We would just come in, and I believe that, yeah, there was the bell. There was a bell. I was going to say there was a bell when you came in. It would go ding, ding. Yeah. And the baskets were usually, there were 3 baskets. There were the bumps, the smooth, and the loaves of bread sitting on this counter. There was a big cash register right there, or it was on one end. And one of the sisters, I mean, she would take your money and you'd get your rolls, and, and they were in brown bags. They weren't in plastic, and, the longer you kept them in those bags, the harder they became, but they were still always good.
And I remember there was a time that as Willie Rear got older, he didn't show up at the Immaculate Conception. So it was sort of a race to get over here because there was 2 other churches letting out at the same time. And you would come up the hill and wonder if your church was let out earlier so you'd be the first in line. And there were some Sundays where you got real lucky, and there were other Sundays that maybe the priest had a little longer sermon, so you were the last one out. So when you got here, you were the last in line out the door. Yeah. But like I said, it was a big part of many, many people in the Kingston community that Rear's was special on a Sunday morning.
It was part of your life way back when.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives you a little sense, right, of what the Sunday list was. Here's this Jewish immigrant family who is making kosher rolls, right? And almost every family I talked to from the Sunday list say they were the perfect size for a sausage patty, right? Sausage, of course, is not a kosher food. And so to me, this is the epitome of, the promise, the potential of this site to talk about how this immigrant food can come here to this country and can take on an entirely new meaning for a different population of people, right? And when we think about the potential of the public humanities to make a difference to to help people's minds open up in new ways, this is really, I think, a good way to get there through your stomach, right? So we've done a bunch of other ways of trying to sort of tell our story. One of them was this summer, or this fall. We had the opportunity to put on a small exhibit at a museum in Uptown Kingston, where we know those tourists end up going, as of now. We're going to get them downtown. But you can see a case, and we're also making a digital exhibit that showcases some of the artifacts that we found through the summer's research. So just in closing, I wanted to just share where we're going from here. We put many of our artifacts onto the Hudson River Valley Heritage, which is exciting. But part of what's really exciting that we get to do next is really think about how does all this stuff that we've learned about where the roles were and all these things help us make the space, interpret the space, right? And so how can we create a furnishings plan? And how can we also create public programs? And so I'm really grateful to Humanities New York for funding a vision grant that we submitted that will be trying to put together, bringing together culinary historians, museum programmers, local bakers in the Kingston area to think through how could we have folks today try to imagine what the rear rolls, or not imagine, but make something like what the rear rolls would have tasted like based on these descriptions of people who ate them. The very last thing, just connection to public humanities practice, is that this fellowship enabled me to imagine another fellowship, which I have this year through the Center for Teaching and Learning here at the Graduate Center, where I'm working to sort of I'm calling it pedagogy through the dough, and thinking about, as I'm working on creating the tours and the interpretive plan for the Rear Center, how can the lessons of museum pedagogy and education be helpful in thinking about teaching in the CUNY classrooms and vice versa. So there's a blog through Visible Pedagogy that shows that, and we're also going to have, they call it a focused inquiry group, where we're going to create a resource showing how museum, public humanities, and classroom pedagogies can learn from each other. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tonya Lake, and I was a Public Humanities Fellow in 2014 and 2015, so in the second year cohort with Tom. And so I've been following his project online, which is really exciting. So in my third year of law school, I was working with the Environmental Law and Policy Clinic, and we were representing a community in rural Niagara County, and they were exposed to the expansion of a hazardous waste facility in their community, chemical waste management. So my role in the clinic that year was to research this idea of environmental justice and to make the argument that this particular working class community should be labeled an environmental justice community by the state. So the state of New York, like many other states, defines environmental justice communities geographically. And the criteria for doing so varies from state to state, but it all centers around low-income and minority communities. And so at that time, I thought, well, why isn't this working class community included in that definition? And I thought, well, gee, I should map this. So I'm going to go get a PhD, and I'm going to map it. So that's what I did. So I wrote an algorithm, and what you're looking at are the results of that. So the results were similar: Long Island, Kings County, and Niagara County. So the red areas are the regions that are defined as environmental justice communities by the state of New York. What you see in the blue circles at the very center is a facility that's releasing some type of pollutant. And the algorithm accounted for both the type and the amount of the toxin that was being released as dispersed across space. So here I'd come up with this great method. At the time, we had interim Governor Patterson, if you recall, and he developed this state environmental justice mapping group, and I was invited to sit on the group, and we're going to talk about ways in which we might improve this state's method for defining these areas. So I was on a call. It was like my first call with them, and it was a 2-hour-long meeting, conference call. And there were people from the Department of Health, Department of Transportation, and they said, Tonya, can you tell us about your work? And so I'm all excited and pumped up, and I'm like, I came up with this map, and then, this is great. And one of the women said, your methods are great, but how do you really know about environmental justice? Have you ever been on the front lines? Have you ever been in these communities? How can you really understand? And at the time, my ego was a little bruised, right? But I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, she's right. And so how do I do that? How do I acquire that knowledge? And so I wanted to go into the community, and it was about that time I applied for the Humanities Fellowship and was accepted. I wasn't sure exactly what I would do, but I knew that I wanted to work with this particular organization, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's the Clean Air Coalition in Buffalo. And so what they were doing at that time was they were going into different neighborhoods and asking the residents what they'd like to see in their neighborhood. So they put out these great big maps of the neighborhood on the table, and they had stickers and different things, and they said, what do you want to see? And what surprised me the most, they wanted they wanted benches, they wanted street lights, they wanted trees. And I was expecting like them to say, I want no more pollution, I want us all to be healthy. And I realized that environmental justice really is so much more than where pollutants are. It's a part of it, for sure, right? We don't want to expose certain communities disproportionately to others. But it really is much larger than that. So this picture here was the first meeting that I went to, and so this is a group of residents and a facilitator, and so they were mapping out what they wanted to see in their community, and that really was the impetus for my future work with the organization. So the Clean Air Coalition, the organization that I worked with, was developed by this woman named Jackie James Creedon, and she's there holding the microphone. So Jackie was just an ordinary citizen in the community of Tonawanda, New York, and they lived near a coking plant. It's called Tonawanda Coke. I don't know if you've heard of it, if you're familiar with Western New York. But what she was finding was a lot of people in her community were becoming extremely ill, and they wanted to know why. So her and some of her neighbors, they went out at night with buckets, and they dug up soil illegally around the facility, and they sent it to the EPA, and they called themselves the Bucket Brigade, which I think is really cool. And so they sent the samples off to the EPA, and sure enough, they came back extremely toxic. So the EPA came in, they ultimately cleaned up the site. There were fines that resulted, and there was a federal case, there were criminal charges brought. But the Clean Air Coalition expanded beyond that to go into communities where there were high rates of asthma, other illnesses, and to really advocate for environmental justice. So at that time, they were toying with this idea of how they could get involved in the participatory budgeting movement. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that, but it's a way to take public dollars and put them in the hands of the community. So each municipality or district or what have you gets a certain amount of discretionary funding every year in their budget. But usually the person who's like sitting at the head of that district, right, they say how that money is spent. And of course they take in, input from the community. But in this idea of participatory budgeting, the community actually votes on different projects and things that they'd like to see improved in their community. So the Clean Air Coalition was very influential. In fact, they led the movement to bring this to Buffalo. So I knew that I wanted to be involved with that on some level, but there were also some practical projects that I worked on with them. So because I had this mapping skill that I acquired in undergrad at the University of Whitewater in Wisconsin, I never turned down the opportunity to get a practical skill, right? Because you just never know when you want to map something. So what we're looking at here, these are the districts, the council districts in the city of Buffalo. And the Clean Air Coalition at that time was interested in knowing how public housing units were dispersed between these districts. And so they were doing some other work with that. And so I thought, okay, I can map that for you. But these districts are important for the purpose of this discussion in that as part of the participatory budgeting steering committee that I sat on where we were designing this process, we had to pick a district where we would like to see this money put for the first year if we could get it approved by the city. We had to get the mayor on board, and we had to get all the councilmen and people on board. And so we decided on the Maston district, which is a very low-income community and very high minority concentration. So This is, this was an event very early on in this process inside City Hall in Buffalo. And so in the top, it'll be your top right hand, the gentleman in the pink shirt, his name is Joshua Lerner, and he was very influential in leading the participatory budgeting efforts in New York City and now across the country and even globally. So we would meet at various venues and we would talk about how much money would we ask for, what will the process look like, who will be allowed to vote on projects, who will be allowed to submit ideas. And so we did this mock voting experience on this particular day. And so people proposed projects. So labor and trade training, new playground equipment, after school programs, basketball courts, and so then we would guess how much each project would cost. And then everyone in the room went around and we voted, and so we just kind of went through the exercise, and this really created a lot of excitement within the community. But then we took it further and we went into the neighborhoods, we went into the basements of churches, we went into libraries, and we brought residents in, and it was really incredible how many residents actually were interested in this process, excited to invest in their community, and some of them were discouraged. So some of these events, it got a little heated because we had residents saying, look, we've tried this in the past, what's gonna be different this time? You know, where's this money going to come from? Yeah, right, we'll see. And so there was a lot of dialogue that had to take place. And so this is where a lot of my training that I acquired from the Public Humanities Fellowship came into play, because part of that training was to learn how to engage with communities, how to facilitate discussion, how to keep things calm, how to express your work and your research in a way that communities that aren't familiar can understand. And so for me, the fellowship was invaluable in this process. So when we went to these different communities, we ultimately were proposing that we would get $150,000 from the city. And so people had to come up with ideas. There were over 600 ideas ultimately proposed in the Maston district where this occurred. Some of those ideas included a farmer's market. A lot of folks wanted a farmer's market because they wanted access to healthy food. Maston district doesn't have a lot of grocery stores. In fact, I don't even know if they have one other than the corner store market. Another idea was that they wanted a tool rental where folks could come in and rent lawn mowers and different lawn equipment for free to improve their properties, more trash receptacles and recycling bins in the neighborhoods. Also, one of the things that actually won was a healthy cooking class that was offered twice a month, as well as the local farmers market. So the project was very successful, and it's continuing today, and it's now been expanded to the Niagara district as well. So here we have images of the big fight, the ultimate fight in Buffalo City Hall. It really went down to the wire. So at this particular meeting, the mayor and some of the council members left the room right before the vote took place, and there was these last-minute negotiations, and everyone's on the edge of their seat, everyone that had been working on this project. And ultimately, it was approved, which was really exciting. And so the projects that I worked on with them have continued, and I've continued my engagement with them, and I work as a social justice and environmental justice advocate within the city of Buffalo and engage with a lot of different groups. I've continued on with the New York Humanities, and I'm now a public scholar, and so I'm able to go into communities and talk about this idea and some of the work that I've done, and that's been really exciting as well. But again, the skills that I learned during that year and the people that I've met and the connections that I've made and the doors that have opened for me have just been incredible. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Max Hayward. I was in the first cohort of the Public Humanities Fellows when I was doing my PhD at Columbia University. And I'm now an assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. And actually, the fellowship was instrumental in me getting a tenure-track job because Bowling Green wanted someone to come in to found and direct a center for ethics and public philosophy. And my experience with Humanities New York and with Eileen Galuli's Hayward Center for the Humanities made me, they thought, you know, I had experience and I would be able to do this. And to bring my project, which was founded in New York. So Rethink is a philosophy community outreach project. Philosophy isn't actually much seen in public humanities programming. You tend to see historical or linguistic, local culture, oral history, things like that, but philosophy tends to be absent. But this is surprising in a way. The history of philosophy was very much a public endeavor. The idea of philosophy corralled within the academy is a product of a fairly recent in the history of our culture. And also, in America, it's particularly striking because many of the great American philosophers, such as William James and John Dewey, moved seamlessly between the academy and the public sphere. So with a few friends in graduate school, we actually work in ethics, so we were particularly distressed at the fact that our work was essentially just being written for other scholars within the academy. And hopefully, you know, work in ethics will have some effect on the greater public, but we wanted to do something more direct. And so we founded Rethink to work with disadvantaged communities in New York. And we think that Rethink does three things. So it shows how the idea is to serve as a model to show how philosophy can work outside of a traditional academic context. Second, I think it shows we wanted to really think about offering something to disadvantaged people, not just say, oh, look, we can do philosophy in different contexts, but we can do philosophy in a way that is genuinely helpful and we believe empowering. And thirdly, we think it's a great loss for our culture that philosophy is so little seen, and we wanted to show something about what philosophy can offer to our public discussions about ethics and political values. So it was founded in 2013 by graduate students at Columbia, of which I was one. The New York chapter now has volunteers from 5 different New York universities. We've had scores of people have volunteered for Rethink over its history. So the Graduate Center, NYU, Columbia, the New School, and Fordham. And new chapters are being set up at Harvard and at Bowling Green State University. So we promote philosophical engagement outside of a traditional academic context. We work with members of marginalized and underprivileged groups. So we started off working with court-involved youth, so people who are formerly incarcerated on parole at various community centers in Harlem, and now spreading to the South Bronx as well. And another group we've worked with are called Sanctuary for Families, who work with women who are survivors of domestic violence and sex trafficking, and also with children coming from families that have been harmed by domestic violence. The majority of the people that we work with are people of color, both at Sanctuary for Families and in our projects in Harlem and the South Bronx. We've also in the past worked with actually incarcerated people, but we've tended to prefer people who are just come out. It's easier to talk about philosophy when you don't have prison guards sitting in the room with you. And our goal is to expose our participants to philosophical ideas, especially focusing on ethics, and to model the practice of engaging in respectful debate and the development of people's own ideas. So we partner with a number of community organizations in New York City, including the Children's Village, the Fortune Society, Sanctuary for Families, the Osborne Association, and the South Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation. So 4 of these are groups that work with court-involved youth, and the other is that works with survivors of domestic violence and sex trafficking. And since 2013, we've had hundreds of participants coming through our various programs and discussion groups. And in 2015, we won national recognition. We got the American Philosophical Association's award for innovation and excellence in philosophy programming. You know it's trendy if it says innovation. So how does Rethink work? a lot of the people that we work with, that we serve, have been poorly served by the school system and by traditional academic educational contexts. And our goal was to try and, we realized that we could do philosophy without having a traditional teacher-student dynamic. It was inessential to the practice of doing philosophy. So Rethink sessions, we go into our community partners, and we don't directly recruit participants. It's our community partners who find people, and they build Rethink into their offerings in one way or another. So some of the people we work with are studying for the GED, others are working towards other programs to improve their employability and boost their life chances in various ways. So a Rethink session involves a group of discussion facilitators who are graduate students or faculty from various universities, and we'll go in together and we'll sit around in a circle or in a group or in a bunch of circles in order to avoid having this traditional figure of authority and students. And we use a variety of techniques, facilitated discussions around readings, small group discussions. We'll sometimes play games, get everyone to stand up, and some person will read out a bunch of claims or propositions about what's valuable or what's right or wrong, and people have to move around the room in order to express their views, and how far and fast they move might represent the strength of their agreement or disagreement. We'll have model debates and play various other kinds of games where people practice giving reasons for different views. And we have two ground rules in Rethink. So the first is that you can have any view, but you have to give a reason for what you say. Everything you say has to be backed up by a reason. And the second is that you're allowed to disagree with anyone, but you have to disagree with their ideas and not with the person, to engage in debate that's about substantive issues and not ad hominem arguments. The topics that we focus on include things such as power, responsibility, the justification of punishment itself, which is of course extremely relevant to the people we work with. These are traditional topics in academic philosophy. These are things that ethicists and other philosophers write on. But we don't start off saying, today we're going to talk about authority, or today we're going to learn what equality is. Rather, we'll start off discussing events from people's everyday lives. So we might say, what's something that you have been responsible for? Or on the topic of paternalism, we talk about what's the time when someone gave you advice and you ought to have followed it, but you didn't. And we will use, and people will share personal stories, and we'll use these stories to build into the discussion of philosophical concepts. And the idea is to show that these things actually take off directly from everyday life and lead back into everyday life, thinking about philosophy. We aim to use comparatively few readings. Many of the people that we work with have missed out on various stages of their education and have mixed reading abilities. And indeed, the women that we work with who've been victims of sex trafficking come from all over the world and so have different first languages. And when we do use readings, what we'll do is rather than using an academic text, we'll tend to find a piece from the news. So when we talked about paternalism, we read about the proposed soda ban, to try and show how philosophical ideas are structuring the world that our participants move through. We want them to understand that philosophy is a living and engaged thing, that thinking philosophically is part of living in the world and being an engaged citizen. Doing philosophy isn't just learning a bunch of famous dead white men's names. Of course, it's great when someone says, oh, I'm interested in this, what can I read? And we can direct them that way, but we want them not to think of this just as an extension of school, but rather to think of it as a way of being more reflective in their lives. So I think this shows the way that philosophy is excellently suited to the public sphere. We can do philosophy in an entirely informal, non-academic context. We can do philosophy without having readings. You don't need to have an advanced level of reading to do philosophy, and you can do philosophy whilst you're talking about everyday life. But what does this have to offer the people we work with? Why should they take time to come and learn about philosophy and to come and think about philosophy? And especially people who are fighting against huge obstacles in life. Why is it worth their while? Well, first of all, and sort of the most sort of directly practical thing, is that we think that our sessions equip participants with transferable skills. So they practice articulating and justifying themselves, and they practice the business of engaging in respectful, mutually engaged debate. These are vital life skills, especially for people who are often victims of prejudice and discrimination, who are called upon to justify themselves much more regularly and who are much more prone to be swiftly and harshly judged. It also is just important in any kind of employment context that's going to go beyond minimum wage earning. And we think that it's very important for people who are escaping the cycle of domestic violence or who are escaping the cycle of incarceration to get the sorts of skills that will take them away from minimum wage jobs, which in New York City don't offer the kind of stability that will keep people from falling back in. But on a deeper level, we think that studying philosophy is empowering. Philosophical concepts like equality or responsibility shape the world we live in. We are called upon to take responsibility for things. We use the concept of equality in arguments within the household and in politics, from the household to politics. But often people have internalized dominant views of these concepts that may not reflect their own interests and may not reflect their own experiences. So we've had participants who can explain to us why the current incarceration system is flawed in terms of its poor effects. They'll say that once you go in, you're more likely to go in because you've been around much worse criminals. Many people that we work with were incarcerated for petty drugs offenses, but then they end up, they say that prison is a school for crime. They end up being around people who've actually been involved in things that are far more serious. And it also disrupts their education. It makes it harder for them to get on with their lives. So they could offer this justification for why the incarceration system needs to be reformed. But then when we ask them about why people should be punished in the first place, they would often discuss things in terms of a very harshly retributive framework that wouldn't allow for these kinds of goal-outcome-oriented things, saying, well, we shouldn't punish because it doesn't work. But the justifications they would give didn't talk about that at all. So we had to explain that there was a mismatch between their lived experience and what they thought was the right answer. This is what punishment is about. And saying, well, you don't have to have one view or the other, but you have to explore this tension. Other people we worked with complained about economic inequality, and they knew the effects of economic inequality in their own lives. But then when we asked, what is the nature of economic justice, they say, well, it's just unfair if people have their property taken away in tax. That's just wrong. People should be able to keep everything, all their money. And again, exploring the tension between one view that they've received, it's a very dominant view in American political culture, and another thing that they experience themselves. And again, saying, you have to explore this tension and come and work out what you think for yourself. So, as I said, we believe that our participants are empowered, because at the end of the day, we hope that they have come to live by values that they have adopted in the light of their own reason and experience, that they've had a chance actually to think, what do I genuinely believe? What actually makes sense, given what I know about the nature of the human world in which these concepts operate? And they've got a greater fluency with concepts. They're able to talk in terms of justice, in terms of equality. Some of our participants actually went up in a group to Albany to protest about solitary confinement for minors, using language and concepts that they had explored and developed in Rethink sessions. And I think this shows something about the role of philosophy in our society, or the need for philosophy to take on a greater role, the need for these conversations to happen throughout our society. It's a truism to say that we live in an era of political polarization, and an era where many people lack representation in politics and in the halls of power. You will notice two rather striking things about all the people who are in this room deciding the fate of the nation. But it's important to remember that although it's easy to fall into games of tribalism and partisanship, in the end, political disagreements are philosophical disagreements. We're disagreeing about philosophical questions about what is liberty, what is equality, what is justice. And we think that philosophical discussion, philosophical arguments are a better way of resolving these disagreements than simply resorting to sheer partisanship and tribalism. And that in doing that, we need to represent and understand the perspective of marginalized and disadvantaged people. And a lot of people say they speak for the disadvantaged, but it's not clear that they've actually spent time not just asking them one-on-one of, oh, what do you think? But, oh, you say you think this, but what about this? Have you considered this possibility? The two things you say are in tension with each other. Which one do you pick? Actually taking the time to see what people genuinely think when they've reasoned through difficult questions and come to reflectively endorse one position or another. And we think that giving classes in philosophy can help people learn to articulate their own views and learn to participate as citizens in a fuller way. What is the future of Rethink? So Rethink started in 2013. It's still going strong. We are growing in New York City. Future projects, we've just pioneered a role for alumni of the program to get involved in the organization of Rethink to help facilitate discussions. We've had a long-term goal, which is coming along, to put members of the NYPD and court-involved youth in the same room to hold discussions together. But beyond New York, Rethink is intended to be, it's a replicable model. It doesn't have to be just these universities or even these particular communities. We've created a wealth of materials and a way of doing philosophy discussions that could be taken to other cities in the country and indeed abroad. And our goal is to help other groups, other universities, other university groups, to run public philosophy using the Rethink model. And to that end, my employer, Bowling Green State University, is currently in the process, as I said, of setting up a center for ethics and public philosophy, and Rethink is going to be at the heart of that. There'll be a new chapter in Bowling Green. And hopefully we'll be able to use that to actually have an online repository of readings, lesson plans, or, well, not lesson plans, class plans, or discussion workshop plans. I'm undercutting my own description of my project, and to actually get it out there so that people who say, oh, we heard of these things that people were doing in New York, we want to do the same thing. Well, it will all be there, and people will be able to find out ways of doing public philosophy for themselves. This is a piece of art made by one of our participants. She clearly loved Rethink so much that it inspired her. So that's my contact information. And the current director of Rethink NYC is now Adam Blazier, and this is his contact information. Oh, and one other thing that may come out of it is I was just approached by Columbia University Press asking if I'd be interested in doing a book project on public philosophy, and I'm interested in the experience of moving from New York City to rural Ohio. And we talk about polarization and the coastal, heartland, urban, rural divisions in the country. So if this happens, it will be the direct result of my time as a humanities fellow at Humanities New York. But independently of that, it's already been an incredible opportunity for me and an incredible boon to my work. Thank you very much.
If people do have questions for any of the specific presenters or as a group, perhaps.
Hi, John Winters. I'm ABD in the History Department here at the Graduate Center. My question is actually for Francisco. Language preservation, very important in sort of maintaining cultural heritage and knowledge of self and history, these sorts of things. So I'm really curious about what you think of the potential for your work to be sort of, I don't know, institutionalized. I'm thinking of Percy Abrams runs the Haudenosaunee Language Center, and from Syracuse, you mentioned the Seneca Language Center. There's even a Rosetta Stone. They have an endangered language series, and they did a Ganyangeha, the Mohawk language series, and it is published and it is out. So I was curious, you coming in as an academic, but seeing the, I guess, effectiveness of some of these institutional things in preserving and teaching language, and what direction you think your work would take in that light.
Thank you for the question. That's a great one. I haven't really given much thought into, it's a weird thing to say, but to institutionalize. I do know such programs exist. I'm currently at the University of New Haven, and I'm working with the Native American Council at Yale. And they have classes on Cherokee, I believe Sioux. Like they have like these kind of curricularized. And I think that's really cool. However, I personally don't feel that my project is ready for that type of sustained thing. So if I were to be like, if that were to come up, I guess, I would, immediately call on my contacts and say, oh, what do you guys think? And that comes from, working with Adam, going to these Humanities New York workshops, and discussing that our role as public humanists isn't always to be like the leader, right? Sometimes you have to know when to kind of say, oh, well, this is a question for this person or this group. So I do see some value in it. I would love to maybe one day go in that direction. I just, I'm so far removed from it, I suppose, that I can't quite conceive of a way to, make it work at this time, if that makes sense, yeah. Thank you, though.
Hi, I'm Keith Wilson, Acting Director here at the Center for Humanities. My question really is for, I guess, Thomas and Sarah, which is about the sort of health-giving properties of the experiences that you're offering. It made me, like the individuals that you see pictured, Sarah, in your project, you can see them come alive when they're in the environment, and it made me think there's a researcher in England, Claire Craig, who works with Alzheimer's sufferers, and she puts on things like old bus tours that haven't existed, and you see these patches of clarity, which I wonder, so the question is in two directions. One, for the community that immediately surrounds and and how to quantify and build on the various benefits of that, and then also for the external visitor in both cases, how you see methods of maybe personalizing their experience when they interact with this historical material. Anyway, that's just a...
Okay. Is this thing on? Yeah, okay. No, it's a great question. I think part of my curiosity, actually, it was like a genuine question, how many people had been to Kingston and how many had been to Rondout, right? Is trying to figure out who the audience for our museum is going to be. And, having a site-specific immigration history museum in Kingston is very different, and Rondout in Kingston is different than the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And that's an opportunity, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, as museums have been reimagined and are currently being reimagined, there are all kinds of populations who historically have been underserved by them, people with Alzheimer's, people who are blind, all different kinds of populations. How can we become a site that serves those, that's built, that baked literally pedagogy from the dough? How can we bake into the interpretive plan the visitors who we want to bring in? And so it's a real question that I and we are grappling with to figure out who will those people be? How can we ask them right away, what do you need? How can we make something useful to you? And then figure out how to make it, right? And figure out how to fund it. And I think getting to the second part of your question, that's the other really exciting thing that museums are doing. I mean, I was just at actually a preview tour of a new experience that they're working on at the Tenement Museum. And they've done this amazing digital experience called Your Story, Our Story, where people are uploading objects and their own stories about these objects. And it's an amazing project. I've done it with my students at John Jay College. But they've now taken some of those object biographies, if you want to call them that, little excerpts, and brought them, so there's like a kid or a woman from wherever in the country, they've now become a part of the permanent exhibit that's on display at the Tenement Museum, right? So this idea that it's not a one-way direction that the curator puts out and the public receives, but that the we facilitate the opportunity for people to make things to bring back in. Part of what's really neat about the site as they've created it is that there's opportunities for satellite sites to have their own kind of collections within it. So that's for sure something that I would want under the auspices of the Rear Center to be participating in, right? As a small fledgling organization, we can't create something like that of ourselves, but how can we partner with or benefit from the work being done by others to do that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think one thing I've been trying to do, and I've always envisioned the project this way, is that it's more of you, less of me. Is that it always needs to be a crowdsourced project, because I know many upstate New Yorkers are have fierce regional pride, right? And you know, so I have people that are working on tours on Rochester, for instance, and that story, that local story, needs to come out, you know, and needs to be colored by that experience. So I want to give people opportunities to tell those stories, because right now Upstate Historical has a lot of white old men on it. So I would like to, you know, tell those diverse stories and to have people make a connection or discover a connection through places and visiting places, or doing that online, but making that connection that hopefully can inspire them to express themselves in a different way, and to write for me and talk about that. Because I think at its core, it's a personal, and there needs to be a element of passion there that I want in the site. So I'm working on that, you know, slowly but surely. Thank you.
Curious, maybe I can take you to a slightly different level for the entire panel. I mean, it's wonderful that the Mellon Foundation has provided philanthropic support for this, and we happen to be in a public institution, but I'm old enough to have seen the discipline of geography disappear as an academic discipline, and others are tottering. And I'm wondering whether collectively you can see shaping a rationale in the future for public support for the public humanities.
I have views on this. Well, I actually think that a lot of people can identify that our American society, and my British society is no better in this respect, is facing a crisis. It's a crisis of a lack of communication. That we are having political, ethical, social disagreements, but there's no real communication. There's no real debate. It's pretty much devolved into a shouting match. And if there's anything that the humanities, I think, are well equipped to do, it is to show people what it means to communicate in a genuine and mutually responsive way. And a society that doesn't fund the humanities, that doesn't educate people in the humanities, that doesn't devote resources to the humanities, is inevitably going to be a society which doesn't have a public conversation. And a society that doesn't have a public conversation is going to face the dysfunction. I mean, and very practical levels of dysfunction. I mean, Brexit in the UK was based on a dysfunctional conversation. People who had not been trained in basic epistemological practices of understanding the sources of their information, making decisions. People voting on the basis of group identity, that we dislike immigrants or whatever, and against their own and collective economic interests. So this is actually costs money. It costs money when people can't talk, when people can't communicate. So if you want a brute pragmatic argument, there is one.
Oh, I actually think, I was thinking about this today as I was walking around, but, you know, thinking about what Max said, and that I think, you know, the humanities and public humanities are so important today. I was just at a talk about Civil War monuments, and you know, and how that goes. And I think as a people now, we just are so impatient with nuance and what things mean, and seeing things from different points of view, and that things can be both and. And I think as public humanists, and humanists in particular, we live in nuance, right? That's what we do, and there's no easy answers. So the need for things like this, especially Max, what you're doing, you know, is critically important. You know, and I think that government institutions need to fund this kind of things, and that's why, you know, whenever time the NEH is on the chopping block, it gives me heart palpitations, right? Because that's what the lifeblood is. You know, that's what helps us through these really hard times.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that
Columbia University used to have a really good geography department, and they got rid of it, but it didn't ever really die in that it's kind of coming up in other ways. So we now have something called the Center for Spatial Research, which is sort of digital geography and the result of things, things like GIS mapping and whatever. So I think that at least in my time in the university, the commitment and interest on the part of not only the students but the faculty at a place like Columbia has risen astronomically. I mean, one of the things that Max's project Rethink, and he put up on the on his slide about Adam Blaise, is that how I said? Is that he's now a public humanities fellow at Columbia, right? So not this format, but we were inspired by it to now fund 4 different projects, which includes Rethink, and it's taking place at Rikers Island, as well as in the community 10026, which is right across the park from Columbia. So I feel like it's, I mean, if there's a little hope for the humanities, it really sort of resides in that.
Maybe that's the ending. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I also want to invite everyone to join us over at the Archive, which is a bar, which is this same block, but up on 36th Street, so the same, between the same avenues, but up a block or two. We're on 30.
John knows. Between 34th. Do you know where it is?
Yeah, it's on 36th Street, between 5th Avenue and and Madison, which is, right now we're between 5th Avenue and Madison. So it's literally go out the doors, go up a couple blocks, and make a right, and the Archive is halfway down the block. So we'll be over there. We're happy to have you guys join us, have a beer, or whatever else you want to have. Well, thank you all for coming.